Imagine this. At a Christmas party, surrounded by 30 relatives, your dad calls you a failure just because you don't have a husband or kids. What would you do? I was in that exact situation. But why did he say that? And how did I respond after hearing those cruel words from him? Let me tell you the story of what I went through. Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria Harrison. I'm 35 years old, and I currently run Harrison Properties, a real estate company based in the suburbs of Sacramento, California. After years of hard work, my company has reached a steady place. We've built a solid team of 20 employees. My husband, David Harrison, he's the most incredible man I've ever met. We've only been married for 3 months, and honestly, this has been the happiest time of my life. David's a freelance graphic designer, which means he works from home most days, and he usually has a delicious dinner ready for me by the time I get back from the office. We live in a 2-bedroom house in Roseville. It's not huge, but cozy and peaceful, just the right size for 2 newlyweds. Our daily life is pretty simple, but it's full of meaning. I wake up early on weekdays and drink coffee with David while he makes breakfast. Then I drive to the office while he stays home to work on his projects. We usually cook together, watch Netflix, or talk about our day in the evenings. But the most special part of our week is the weekend visits to my grandpa. Grandpa Frank Harrison, 78 years old, is the man I respect most. He lives alone in a small house in Auburn, about a 45-minute drive from where we are. Every Saturday, David and I see him, bringing his favorite foods, and spending the whole afternoon talking with him. But I need to take you back to understand why my relationship with Grandpa means so much. I have to tell you what happened in my family, a story about sacrifice and the greed of people who share my DNA. My story begins at a Christmas party in 2023. At the time I was 33, still single, hadn't met David yet, and my life revolved entirely around work and the family responsibilities I had carried for years. A week before the party, my mom, Lisa, called and asked me to come home for the family gathering. She said I should be there because they were inviting more relatives than usual this year. So, listening to my mom, I went, and like I always did, I brought her favorite chocolate chip cookies, a little tradition of mine every time I came home. When I stepped into the familiar house in Elk Grove, I could already hear the buzz of laughter and chatter coming from the living room. There were about 30 relatives there that day, uncles, aunts, cousins. I barely saw them more than once a year. As soon as I walked in, the usual flood of questions started. Uncle Dan asked about work. Aunt Jennifer wanted to know about my travel plans. But the question that came up the most, over and over, was about love and marriage. So, Victoria, when are you getting married? You're 33 already. How come you don't have a boyfriend? Anyone special in your life yet? The questions just kept coming like some endless loop that wouldn't stop. I did my best to answer politely and with patience. I said, when I get married, I promise everyone here will get an invitation. But then some relatives started saying things that cut a little deeper. I overheard the whispers behind my back. She's 33 and still single. Think there's something wrong with her? Maybe Victoria's got that kind of issue? The unspoken speculation about my sexuality started spreading through the tense air of the party. And that's when my dad, Bob Harrison, began to boil over. I saw him drinking more and more, his face turning red from both the alcohol and his growing frustration. For my dad, the family's image has always been everything, and having a 33-year-old, unmarried daughter didn't fit the picture he wanted the world to see. Around 8 p.m., when everyone had been drinking quite a bit and the atmosphere grew louder, my dad walked over to where I was sitting. He stood in front of me, his eyes bloodshot from drinking, and asked a question that made the entire living room go silent. How does it feel to be 35 years old with no husband, no kids, and no one who loves you? A few family members standing nearby heard that question. The tension filled the room. I felt like every eye was suddenly focused on me. Immediately, Brandon, my first younger brother, 29 years old, burst out laughing and said in a mocking tone, "You should find a man, Victoria. This isn't okay." Tyler, the youngest, 25, didn't hold back either. He looked at me scornfully and added, "Maybe people are right. You should probably get your gender checked." Hearing those mocking remarks from my family, I turned to look at my mom, Lisa Harrison. Deep down, I still held on to a bit of hope that she would speak up for me, stop my dad and brothers from saying such hurtful things. But she just lowered her head, her hand trembling as she held her wine glass, and said nothing to defend me. And this time, just like all the other times, she chose silence whenever Dad scolded someone in the family. That night, I sat in the middle of my own family, but I felt deeply hurt and completely isolated. The laughter around me began to sound like screaming inside my head. After the mocking words from my dad and my two younger brothers, while the rest of the family stayed lost in the clinking of glasses, I slipped into painful memories from the past. Old images started replaying in my mind like scenes from a movie stuck on rewind. I remembered my first love, Max Johnson, when I was 18. Max was a kind-hearted young man with bright eyes and a smile that always made me feel safe. We were both freshmen at the same university and met in our macroeconomics class. We dated all through our 4 years of college, some of the best years of my life. Max and I shared dreams of a bright future. He was majoring in psychology, and I was studying business. We used to sit together under the big oak tree on campus talking about our lives after graduation. Max wanted to open his counseling practice, and I planned to start a real estate business. We had planned to get married after we graduated in 2010. Max had already started putting together ideas for the wedding, and I had managed to save up a small amount to buy him an engagement ring. But all those plans disappeared the day everything changed, the day my dad had a work accident that same year. My dad was a foreman at a construction site in Sacramento with over 15 years of experience in the field. While checking on the project's progress that day, he fell from a scaffolding 2 stories high onto the hard concrete below. The accident had devastating consequences. He suffered a severe spinal injury, leaving him unable to do any physical labor. He was forced to stop working altogether. The compensation from the company barely covered the initial medical expenses. It wasn't nearly enough to support the family in the long run. After that, my dad sank into alcohol to numb both the physical pain and the emotional helplessness. He started drinking early in the morning, sitting in front of the TV all day, and became short-tempered with everyone around him. The strong, confident man I once knew was replaced by someone bitter and defeated. Our family quickly fell into financial hardship. My mom only worked part-time at a local grocery store, earning barely minimum wage. Many nights when I came home from work, she still wasn't back because she was working the night shift. Many mornings I'd find her in the kitchen with red, swollen eyes. She had cried all night. She tried to hide it, but I knew she was under financial stress. After many nights of listening to my mom cry and talk about the weight she was carrying, I realized I had to step up. I had to take financial responsibility for my parents during this crisis. I couldn't just stand by and watch my family fall apart. The hardest decision I've ever made was breaking up with Max so I could fully focus on earning money to support my family. Max cried a lot the day we said goodbye. He understood my situation, but that didn't make it any less painful for us. And so began 12 years of heavy responsibility. I sent home exactly $2,000 monthly, never missed a single one. I worked various jobs, selling insurance, becoming a real estate agent, and eventually starting my own company. At the same time, I also paid the full college tuition for Brandon, who studied mechanical engineering, and Tyler, who majored in marketing. Each cost around $25,000 a year. I covered it all, 4 years for each. Because I was so focused on earning money and caring for my family, I had no time or emotional space to date anyone else. The pain of losing Max also left me unwilling to open my heart to love again. And now, sitting at this Christmas party, hearing those mocking remarks about still being single, I felt a deep rising anger swell in my chest. Back at the Christmas party, while I was still lost in painful memories of Max and the 12 years of silent sacrifice, the sounds around me slowly pulled me back to reality. Uncle Dan, my dad's cousin, greeted me with a friendly smile. He was holding a beer in his hand, approaching me with a casual gesture of a toast, something normal at a family gathering. Just as Uncle Dan reached out to clink glasses, my dad spoke up loudly again. "Why are you toasting with that failure?" That sentence hit me like a bolt of lightning. It was the final straw after everything I had endured that evening, the mocking words, the looks of contempt, and now a direct insult in front of the entire family. I couldn't hold it in any longer. A wave of rage surged up from deep inside my chest. I stood up from my chair, my whole body trembling with emotion. I looked my father straight in the eye, then swept my gaze across every face in the room, now locked on me. My voice rang out in the silence. I asked loudly, "I'm the failure?" Everyone in the room was staring at me. I paused for a second to catch my breath. Then I continued, speaking clearly in front of everyone. Failure. For the past 12 years, I've sent home $2,000 every month without fail. I paid full college tuition for Brandon and Tyler. That's nearly $500,000 I've poured into this family. I gave up the love of my life, Max. I gave up my youth to carry the responsibility that neither of my brothers contributed a single dollar toward. The room went completely silent after I spoke. I saw faces around me shift, surprise, shock, maybe even guilt. It was probably the first time anyone had heard me talk about what I had done for the family all those years. Brandon and Tyler stood nearby, their faces pale. They knew everything I said was true, but never expected me to say it out loud in front of everyone. Then my dad shouted, "Get out of here, and don't you ever come back." In that moment, I turned to my mom, holding on to one last fragile hope that she would finally speak up for me. But once again, she just sat there in silence, her eyes fixed on the table. Her fingers clutched the napkin tightly, but her lips stayed sealed, like stone. Brandon and Tyler stood there too, silent. Neither of them said a word to support me. After everything I'd done for them, paying for their college so they could graduate and get stable jobs, they still chose to stay quiet while I was being humiliated. I felt my heart shatter into pieces. In that moment, I realized how truly alone I was in my own family. I walked over to the coat rack and grabbed my jacket. There was only one thought running through my mind: leave this place and never come back. Just as I picked up my coat and turned to head for the door, a voice rang out from across the room, old but clear and commanding. "Stop right there." Everyone turned toward my grandfather, Frank, who had been quietly observing everything from his seat until then. He stood up from his chair, his sharp eyes locked onto my father. The air in the room suddenly shifted, thick with tension. I froze in place, coat in hand, sensing that something important was about to happen. Grandpa slowly made his way to the center of the room. His gaze moved from face to face like he was weighing what he was about to say. At that moment, I knew something was coming because I had never seen him like that before. After walking up and standing directly before my father, Grandpa spoke clearly and unwaveringly. He looked my dad straight in the eye and said, "The one who should leave this house is you, not her." It was like my dad had been struck by lightning. His face turned bright red, part rage, part alcohol. He shouted back, his voice trembling, "I'm your son." But Grandpa didn't flinch at his outburst. He answered calmly but with force, "And Victoria is my granddaughter." Then something happened that no one in the room could have seen coming. Grandpa turned around, looked out across the room full of 30 stunned relatives, and made an announcement that hit like a bomb. "This house will be signed over to Victoria." When he said it, I felt like someone had just dumped a bucket of ice water over my head. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid everyone could hear it. This was a 4-bedroom house in Elk Grove, worth nearly $850,000, a spacious home Grandpa had purchased in 2008. Since the accident and my father's bankruptcy, he and my mom had been living here rent-free. But this house wasn't just a place to live. It symbolized the financial stability our family had held on to for the last 15 years. My parents had lived here like they owned the place, even though on paper, Grandpa had always remained the legal owner. After Grandpa dropped that bombshell announcement, my dad practically lost his mind. He shouted, his voice shaking with fury, "What the hell are you doing? This is our house!" Brandon and Tyler immediately jumped in to protest. Brandon was the first to speak up. "We're your grandkids too. You can't just play favorites like this." Tyler quickly joined in. "Yeah, Grandpa, we have as much right to this as Victoria does." The room erupted into noise as relatives whispered and murmured all over the living room. But then Grandpa raised his hand high, signaling for silence. His natural authority swept through the room, and within seconds, everything went quiet. Then he began to make his point with one sharp, simple question. "For the past 12 years, who's been sending $2,000 monthly to keep this family afloat?" My dad stood there in silence, unable to answer. He knew he couldn't argue with that truth. After a pause, Grandpa continued, "Who paid every cent of college tuition for those two? $25,000 per year per kid for 4 years. After that question, Brandon and Tyler fell silent, unable to meet Grandpa's eyes. They knew exactly who had made all that possible: me. When no one spoke up, Grandpa delivered his final words with a calm but unshakable tone. "Giving this house to Victoria is the right thing to do." Then came the most surprising part of that Christmas night: support from the rest of the family. Uncle Dan, the same one who had tried to toast with me earlier, was the first to speak. Frank's right. Giving the house to Victoria is more than fair. Aunt Beth, my dad's cousin, nodded in agreement and added, Victoria deserves this. She sacrificed more than anyone in this family. Aunt Anne, a distant relative, even did the math out loud. 12 years times $24,000 a year. That's $288,000. And that doesn't even include tuition for the boys. That's enough for Victoria to buy a house like this alone. With nearly everyone in the room siding with me at that point, my dad looked around in disbelief. He shouted in frustration, "Why are all of you taking her side? This is betrayal." But the family stood their ground. Someone replied firmly, "We're not betraying anyone, Bob. We're just telling the truth." Hearing the support from everyone around me, I felt emotions rising inside. For years, I believed everything I had done was just a duty, something no one noticed or cared about. But now I realized they had seen it all, and they respected it. Finally, Grandpa spoke again, this time with a tone that made it clear his decision was final. "My mind's made up. It's my house, and I can decide who gets it." He paused, locking eyes with my dad and both of my brothers. Then he added slowly and firmly, "You have 30 days to pack your things and leave. Tomorrow, my lawyer, Jonathan Miller, will come by to begin the paperwork." My dad stood there frozen like a statue, his face pale. Brandon and Tyler exchanged panicked glances. They never imagined it would come to this. My mom still sat silently in the corner, not saying a single word. Maybe she had grown used to surrendering to the decisions made by the men in the family. And I stood there in the middle of the room, coat still in hand, feeling like my entire life had just shifted in a few minutes. Grandpa hadn't just defended me from humiliation. He had acknowledged my sacrifices in a way I never dared hope for. For the first time, I felt I was finally treated fairly in my family. After that shocking announcement, Grandpa turned to me and said calmly, "Victoria, drive me home. I have something I want to talk to you about." The relatives began to leave individually, but not in awkward silence like I expected. Instead, they approached me, shaking my hand and congratulating me with genuine warmth. My parents and 2 younger brothers stayed behind in the living room, their faces full of confusion and disbelief. I didn't say a word to them. I helped Grandpa out to the car. During the 70-minute drive from Elk Grove to Auburn, where Grandpa lived, we sat silently for the first few minutes. The glow of the streetlights streamed in through the windows, casting faint streaks of light across his face. Eventually, I couldn't hold back anymore. As we turned onto I-80, I asked, "Why did you give me the house?" Grandpa answered immediately, short but firm, "Because you deserve it." After a long pause, he continued, and what he said next caught me completely off guard. "I wrote my will 2 years ago. That house was already going to be yours after I pass." I nearly hit the brake pedal in surprise. "Then why transfer it early?" I asked. He sighed, looking out the window as the road rolled by. "Because I don't trust your parents and 2 brothers," he said. "They're greed after I'm gone. They'll fight Sue and make your life miserable." His explanation helped everything start to make sense. A few seconds passed, and then he turned to me and said, "Today, while your dad was starting drama in front of the whole family, I figured I'd take the opportunity and make it official right then and there." In that moment, I silently admired Grandpa's foresight, how he saw through people and planned ahead. When we stopped at a red light, Grandpa rested his hand on my shoulder and gently shifted the conversation. He knew I was still hurting over Max, my first love, the one I had sacrificed so much for. With a kind voice, he said, "You have to learn to let go of the past. Sometimes you need to open your heart to whatever comes next." When we finally pulled up to his house in Auburn, he looked at me with hopeful eyes and said, "My only wish before I die is to attend your wedding and hold your child in my arms." I nodded, promising him I would try, even though deep down I knew love isn't something you can force or schedule. But looking into Grandpa's eyes, full of quiet longing, I felt a sense of responsibility to at least try and open my heart again. Back in my home, I felt like my entire life had changed completely in a single night. I lay in bed, unable to sleep. My eyes stared at the ceiling as my mind circled back to Grandpa's words on the drive home. Images from the Christmas party replayed in my head like scenes from a film stuck on repeat. For the first time, I felt deeply grateful because someone had finally seen my silent sacrifices. For 12 years, I believed that sending money home and paying my brother's tuition was a natural duty, something no one cared about or ever acknowledged. But Grandpa had seen everything. And more importantly, he stood up for me when I needed it the most. Lying in the dark of my room, I promised myself to take good care of Grandpa in the years he had left. He was already 78, and I knew our time together wasn't endless. I decided to spend more time visiting him, listening to his life stories, and ensuring his final years were filled with peace and comfort. But what lingered in my thoughts the most was his love advice. Max was the past, a chapter that had already closed in my life. Maybe it was finally time to stop living in the shadow of old pain and choose to move forward. As the light of dawn began to creep through the small window, I decided to open my heart to new love, just as Grandpa had encouraged me to do. Maybe somewhere out there, there's still a man waiting for the genuine love I know I can give. And maybe, just maybe, Grandpa will genuinely get to attend my wedding someday soon. The next morning, just as I finished my first cup of coffee, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw the name Jonathan Miller, Grandpa Frank's attorney. As soon as I answered, Jonathan spoke with his usual professional tone. "Good morning, Victoria. I'll need your details to begin transferring the house title." He explained the documents I'd need to provide: a valid ID, social security number, current address, and basic financial details. I quickly jotted everything down and promised to email the documents within the hour. After I sent the email, Jonathan followed up with news that hit me harder than I expected. "I've also sent an official notice to your parents and brothers requiring them to vacate the house within 30 days, starting today." Hearing that, an unexpected wave of sadness washed over me. Despite everything that happened the night before, despite how they treated me, they were still my family. The thought of my parents and younger brothers packing up and leaving the home they had lived in for 15 years stirred a painful guilt deep in my chest. But at the same time, I knew they wouldn't take this quietly. Knowing my dad's pride and Brandon and Tyler's selfishness, I could already sense what might come next. Angry phone calls. Maybe they'd pester Grandpa. Or worse, they might even try to take legal action and contest the decision. I wasn't naive. I knew this wasn't the end of the conflict. It was probably just the beginning. While I was sitting in my office reviewing a home sale contract that afternoon, my phone rang. Grandpa's name lit up on the screen. The moment I answered, his voice came through, urgent and strained. "Victoria, come to my house. It's important." I could hear the exhaustion and tension in his voice, something I rarely ever heard from him. I shut my laptop and drove straight to Auburn without a second thought. When I walked into his house, the scene stopped me cold. My parents and both of my brothers sat in the living room. They were gathered around Grandpa, their faces tense and full of determination. They were pressuring him, trying to convince him to take back his decision to transfer the house. The air was so thick with tension that it pressed against my skin. As I entered the room, all four turned to look at me. But instead of family warmth, I was met with hostility, as if I were an intruder, the enemy. Dad immediately stood up and snapped at me. "What the hell are you doing here?" Before I could answer, Grandpa cut in with a firm voice. "I asked her to come." He paused, looked my father and brothers in the eye, then continued. "She's the new owner of this house. If you have something to say, you say it to her." Right then, I understood. Grandpa allowed me to face them directly, to draw the line, stand my ground, and protect what I had earned. My father turned to me, his face red with rage. He barked out an order like I was still a 10-year-old. "You are not kicking us out of this house." Feeling Grandpa's trust behind me, I looked straight into my father's eyes and asked calmly, "Why not?" That simple question seemed to catch him off guard. He yelled, "Because I'm your father. Because we're family." The word family hit me like a slap. I replied with a steady voice, "Fine. If we're family, give back every dollar I've contributed to this family over the past 12 years. Then I turned to Brandon and Tyler, looked them both in the eye, and said, "And you two pay back every cent of college tuition I covered." Dad quickly tried to twist the logic, shouting, "That was your responsibility as the oldest daughter. You're supposed to take care of the family." When he said responsibility, I couldn't hold back anymore. I fired back. Then what have they done for this family? What have they contributed to deserve what I gave up? Brandon stepped in, his face tight with resentment. "You're the big sister. It's your job to take care of us. Don't be so petty." Hearing those words, I realized they had no intention of changing, no remorse, no accountability. So I made my final move. With a clear and resolute voice, I said to them all, "You have two choices. 1, move out within 30 days, as my lawyer informed you, or 2, Stay here and pay $2,500 in rent every month." Upon hearing that, my mom began to cry. She stood up, tears streaming down her cheeks, and begged, "Please, daughter, we're family. Don't kick your parents out like this." Her tears cut deep, but I remembered every time she stayed silent, when I was humiliated, insulted, pushed aside. So I looked at her and said, "Enough, Mom. When you needed money, you knew how to ask me for help, but when I was being ridiculed and humiliated, you chose silence." She didn't respond. She just quietly wiped her tears. Seeing the tension rise and realizing this couldn't be settled with words, I turned to Grandpa and said, "Can I call the police?" Grandpa looked tired, worn from the argument, but he nodded slowly and said, "Go ahead." I pulled out my phone, but before I dialed, I looked around at all of them and gave one last warning. "You have 1 minute to walk out that door. If you're still here after that, I'm calling the cops." They could see I wasn't bluffing, and they knew Grandpa was standing behind me. Reluctantly, Brandon and Tyler got up. My mom kept crying. As they headed toward the door, my dad stopped, turned around, and stared at me with pure hatred in his eyes. In a cold, low voice, he said, "Remember this day. This isn't over." Watching their backs as they walked out, I felt a strange mix of relief and pain. Relief because I had finally stood up for myself. Pain because I had just confronted and pushed back against the very people who were supposed to be my family. At that moment, Grandpa placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "You did the right thing, Victoria. Sometimes a person has to learn to say no." His words gave me a sense of peace, and I knew right then there would be no more backing down. Not again. 30 days passed like drops of water falling one by one, slow and steady, and just as I had predicted, they stayed put in the house. Not a single phone call from my parents or either of my brothers, no attempt to negotiate, no sign whatsoever that they intended to move out. On the morning of day 31, I called Jonathan Miller, my grandfather's attorney, and updated him on the situation. In his usual calm, professional tone, Jonathan said, "Victoria, I'll file for an eviction order with the court today. They violated the legal notice." He explained that the court would have no trouble approving the eviction with all the documentation in place, the written notice delivered on time, the completed and legally valid transfer of ownership, and the refusal to comply. Just as Jonathan had predicted, the court approved the order within 3 days. They were legally required to vacate the house within 24 hours of receiving the court's notice. Eviction day came. Grandpa and I stood outside quietly watching as the process unfolded. Local police and court officers had arrived early, prepared to carry out the court order with full authority and professionalism. Watching my parents and 2 brothers carry box after box out of the house they'd lived in for 15 years, I felt a deep, sharp ache. I had mentally prepared myself for this moment, but seeing it happen before my eyes still hit harder than I expected. Dad kept arguing with the officers, trying to convince them this was still his home. Mom sat on the front steps crying, while Brandon and Tyler moved around with looks of frustration and helplessness. As the eviction neared its end, Grandpa placed his hand on my shoulder and said in a low, steady voice, "They're not done yet. Their greed is still there." I looked at him and answered with quiet resolve, "I know, Grandpa, but I'm ready to see this through." Hearing that, Grandpa nodded, satisfied. I could sense that in his eyes he saw something he had long hoped to see in me, strength, clarity, and the willingness to stand firm. As the moving truck carrying their belongings pulled away from the neighborhood, I knew this was only the beginning. Knowing my family, they'd find a way to strike back, perhaps in ways I couldn't imagine. But this time, I was ready. 3 months had passed since the eviction, and life for Grandpa and me had gradually returned to normal. There were no harassing phone calls, no unexpected visits, no drama. After doing their homework on the legal process, my family finally realized they had lost and decided to back off for good. One Thursday afternoon, Grandpa called and said, "Victoria, come have dinner with me this weekend. Dress nicely. We've got special guests." I was curious who he meant by special guests, but I didn't press him for details. I put on a white dress shirt and dark slacks that Saturday evening, then drove out to Auburn. When I stepped into Grandpa's living room, I saw 2 guests sitting with him, an older man, probably around 78, with a stern but kind face, and a young man about 30, with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile. As soon as I walked in, Grandpa stood up and said, Victoria, this is Ray Wilson, my close friend from our military days, and this is David, Ray's grandson. After the introduction, Mr. Ray stood and shook my hand firmly. Frank's told me a lot about you, Victoria. Good to finally meet you. David also stood, extending his hand with an effortless, natural grace. Hi, Victoria. My grandpa talks about Mr. Frank and your family all the time. I immediately noticed David's quiet confidence. No arrogance, just kindness in the way he carried himself. But what struck me most wasn't his appearance. It was his gentleness. Throughout dinner, he constantly checked on his grandfather and mine, refilling their water, serving food, and gently asking how they felt. As we talked, I learned David was a freelance graphic designer who worked from home. He had lost both his parents in a car accident when he was young and had been raised by his grandfather, Ray. After dinner, the two older men suddenly stood up. Grandpa said with a grin, "We're going for a walk around the block to help digest. You two stay and talk." David and I looked at each other, and we both understood. This had been planned, but instead of feeling awkward, our conversation flowed naturally. He told me about growing up with his grandfather, and I shared what Grandpa Frank meant to me. We discovered some striking similarities. We had both lost our parents early, learned to be independent from a young age, and shared deep bonds with the men who raised us. Before the evening ended, we exchanged phone numbers. David smiled and said, "It was nice meeting you, Victoria. I hope we get to talk again soon." Driving home that night, I felt something shift inside me, something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. David and I began dating naturally, without pressure or expectations. In the following weeks, we'd meet up on weekends, grabbing dinner at small restaurants in Sacramento, catching movies at the Century Theater, or simply walking through McKinley Park under the soft evening light. David was patient and understanding. He never rushed me or demanded anything I wasn't ready to give. Instead, he listened, truly listened, when I opened up about the pain of losing Max, the years I'd sacrificed for my family, and the profound betrayal that still lingered in my heart. One night, when I talked about Max, David gently placed his hand on mine and said, "Victoria, you've been through so much, but that doesn't mean your heart has to stay closed forever." Over 3 months, I slowly began to open up, naturally, without force. David never tried to replace Max or erase my past. Instead, he showed me day by day that I was still worthy of real love, that I had the right to be happy. After a year of dating, I decided to propose to David on a quiet evening at the end of this past January. The place I chose was the home Grandpa had given me, where my life had started to turn around. I had secretly coordinated with Grandpa Frank and Mr. Ray. When David came over for our usual dinner, I waited until we were all sitting in the living room. Then I got down on one knee, pulled out a small diamond ring I had carefully picked, and looked straight into his eyes. With my voice shaking from emotion, I asked, "David, will you build a new life with me?" Without hesitation, without needing a moment to think, David teared up and nodded. "I'm ready, Victoria." Grandpa Frank and Mr. Ray were sitting right there watching, and they smiled joyfully as we embraced. Grandpa said softly, "I finally got to see it happen." That was the moment I knew I had found the right man to share my life with. After the proposal, we decided to hold our wedding this April, right in the heart of spring, when the flowers in the garden would be in full bloom, creating the most romantic setting we could imagine. One of our most challenging, yet necessary decisions was not inviting my parents, Brandon or Tyler. After everything that had happened, I didn't want our special day clouded by tension, resentment, or old wounds. Instead, the wedding was intimate, with just 50 close guests. Grandpa Frank, Mr. Ray, relatives who had supported me from the beginning, like Uncle Dan and Aunt Beth, a few close friends, and colleagues from my company. The ceremony took place in the garden of the 4-bedroom home Grandpa had given me. We hired a small team to decorate it with strings of fairy lights and fresh flowers, transforming the space into something warm and magical. The most emotional moment came when Mr. Ray walked David down the aisle, standing in for the father he lost years ago. Seeing him in a simple yet elegant black suit, his eyes shimmering with emotion, I couldn't hold back the tears. It was joy, pure and overwhelming. Even without my blood family present, the wedding was everything I hoped it would be. Heartfelt, complete, and deeply meaningful. During our vows, we promised one another we would build a new family where true love was the foundation. Our 2-week honeymoon in Hawaii felt like a dream. We spent our days on the beaches of Maui, explored the volcanic landscapes of Kilauea, and soaked in the joy of being together. I felt reborn, as if I had finally found real happiness. When we returned to California, we moved into the 4-bedroom house and began turning it into our own true home. With David's design talent, he gave the interior a warm, modern look. I focused on the garden, planting flowers and fruit trees, caring for every inch of the yard like it was sacred. Every morning I wake up in this house and feel grateful. Grateful for the life I have now, a life I once thought was beyond my reach. It's been 3 months since our wedding, and I can honestly say this is the happiest chapter of my life. David works from home as a freelance graphic designer, managing his schedule easily and flexibly. He usually works in a small room we converted into his studio, where he creates beautiful designs for his clients. Meanwhile, my real estate company is thriving. With the stability of our new home and a grounded personal life, I've been able to focus entirely on growing the business and expanding our reach. Every week, we visit Grandpa Frank. The bond between him and David is something truly special. They have grown close. He treats David like his own grandson. We also see Mr. Ray, who remains a cherished part of our lives. We're trying to have a baby. David often says he wants Grandpa to hold his great-grandchild, just as he once hoped. Grandpa is now 78, and we both hope we'll have good news to bring him soon. As for my biological family, we've completely cut off contact. Now and then, I hear bits and pieces through extended relatives. My father has sunk deeper into alcohol since losing the house. My mother works 2 jobs to stay afloat, morning shift at a grocery store and evening at a restaurant. Brandon and Tyler now share a small apartment in Sacramento. Financially, things haven't been easy for them. They're only now realizing how much my support once cushioned their lives. But I don't feel guilty anymore. I've chosen a new life built on love, respect, and mutual care. A life where I'm finally seen, valued, and at peace. Today, I'm sharing this story not to ask for sympathy and not to boast about the life I have now. I'm telling it because I know there are so many others out there who are going through the same thing. Maybe you're the oldest child, the one who's carrying the financial weight of the entire family while your siblings take without giving. Perhaps you're sacrificing love, giving up personal dreams because you've been told it's your responsibility. I want to send you a message through my story. Don't let anyone take advantage of your kindness or sacrifices. Family love is essential, but it doesn't mean you must accept being exploited or disrespected. Sometimes saying no and setting firm boundaries isn't selfish. It's how you protect your well-being and your self-worth. It took me 12 years to learn that lesson. I hope my story helps you see it sooner. Remember that you deserve happiness if you're in a similar place. You deserve to be loved genuinely, and you have every right to say no to unfair expectations, even if they come from your own family. That's the end of my story. And now I have one question for you. If you were in my shoes, if your own family called you a failure after 12 years of quietly carrying the financial burden for them, what would you do? Would you stay silent and keep enduring it all in the name of family love? Or would you finally stand up, speak the truth, and demand the respect you've always deserved? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share your perspective. I genuinely want to know what this community thinks. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. And if it resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share it to help support us. Thank you.